So I was this weekend listening to the Phillies game and heard a commercial for energy. And at first, it sounded like your typical, um, solar and wind thing talking about the clean future of energy. But then it surprised me, and that it said we're not just talking about solar and wind, we're talking about LNG. And the commercial went on from there, but they never told you what LNG was. And my guess was that they think, oh, if we say natural gas, that's a dirty word, but LNG, people are just going to go, oh, that sounds intriguing and awesome. And so I was thinking about that when I read recently about how the Department of Energy is rebranding LNG Freedom Gas. So last Tuesday, the department announced plans to increase exports of LNG from a new liquefaction plant in being built in Texas, and by Freeport LNG of Houston. And if you look at the press release talking about this, they decide that they are going to brand LNG as Freedom Gas. And so here's one quote: "Increasing export capacity from the Freeport LNG project is critical to spreading Freedom Gas throughout the world by giving America's allies a diverse and affordable source of clean energy." And then Stephen Winberg, the Assistant Secretary for Fossil Energy, who signed the export order, said in his announcement, "I am pleased that the Department of Energy is doing what it can to promote an efficient regulatory system that allows for molecules of U.S. freedom to be exported to the world." And I mean, this was mocked. I mean, freedom gas is not really the most eloquent statement, but part of my view is that this is an example of placing branding above clarity. And I think the idea really amounts to that you don't really need to change people's minds about whether natural gas is clean or dirty or good or bad for humanity. You can just change the terminology. And look, terminology is important. Like, you do want to use terminology that has positive connotations for positive things and negative connotations for negative things. But terminology can't overcome ideas. So, for example, at CIP, we use like shale technology instead of fracking, and labels like unreliables instead of renewables. But the whole context is that these are more clarifying, more accurate, more precise terms, and that they have to be used in a context where you're explaining and clarifying them. So if you just call something freedom gas, like, that's not going to get anywhere. But if you explain that wind and solar are intermittent sources of energy that that is a fatal flaw in order to be able to supply us with cheap, plentiful, reliable energy, and therefore we should refer to them as unreliables, you're able to brand with clarity, and that can really stick with people and be powerful. Versus if you just start like labeling, we're just going to call wind and solar awful energy, or like European energy. Like, that does not do anything. And now it's true that the green movement will often use misleading terminology that seems to arbitrarily attach positive connotations to things, and that are negative, and negative connotations to things that are positive. But that you cannot fight that battle by trying to do the same thing, because they're only able to do that because we've accepted their framework. It's only because people accept the framework that, yeah, fossil fuels are dirty because they have an impact, that then the kind of misleading terminology, or saying, oh, fossil fuels are an addiction, and things like that, can work. We Because people have accepted the green framework, then you have to actually overcome that framework. You can't just start labeling things with prettier names, because people will say, oh, LNG, that sounds cool. But the first thing they're going to do, if they're actually interested, is like look it up or ask somebody what it means. And they say, oh, that's natural gas. They say, oh, natural gas. Yeah, that's bad for the planet. So you cannot win a war of ideas, with a thesaurus. Any thoughts, Stefan?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's particularly with LNG that's very vulnerable because liquefied natural gas has to be compressed and cooled down to its liquid phase, which requires additional energy. And so it's similar to the Canadian oil sands, right? Where activists will say, "Oh, oil is already bad, but now think about bitumen in the oil sands has to be heated with steam and processed much more than normal crude oil, and then it has an even bigger balance sheet of negatives attached to it. It does the same but requires more energy and so on. And so if you haven't set up this understanding properly with people, then yeah, you will just see, oh, natural gas is just liquefied natural gas is just natural gas with some additional energy requirement to transport it, right? So, and if they then have a negative view of natural gas, obviously exports of natural gas are bad as well. But I see some potential in maybe not freedom gas, but something similar. But the export definitely has high potential to improve the lives of people trading with the United States, and also has high potential of leveraging American influence for a positive impact. So that you could work with that, but of course you need to win the battle of ideas first, so that people understand the value of natural gas. Actually,